Located in the lower South Island of New Zealand, the rolling hills of Otago and Southland make growing oats ideal. This land is farmed by families like the Gardines, who have been growing since the late 1800s.
I'm Graham Gardine and we're farming at Chatton. I'm the fourth generation to be farming in the district. I've got children and grandchildren either on the property or adjacent to it, so we're well grounded in this area.
Michael Gardine, and me and my wife Marie-Louise are equity managers on this farm here. Well, I grew up on the farm just next door to us here with Mum and Dad, and we always grew oats really, originally for the Fleming's mill in Gore. But yeah, now recently, well, for a reasonable while now for Harraways. So yeah, oats has always been a reasonable part of what we're doing as grain farmers.
It was a family property. I worked with my parents and we bought another property from my brother.
This block we've been on since 1981, and since I probably left Lincoln University and came home, and we did some sharing and we split off from the home farm, which is about 10 k's away, and we've been farming here since 81. Yeah.
My name is Jonathan Gardine. I'm a son of John, and I've been farming here on this particular property for 3 years now. I mean, I grew up here, and I've basically spent most of my life here.
Graham has been living on the property since the mid-1970s, and the inland Southland climate is a good climate for mixed farming, including cereal, because the rainfall is about 750 to 800 millimetres, which isn't too high, but is high enough to grow good cereal crops.
The district held the world wheat record for 8 years, and that's on unirrigated ground, so it's a good climate to be in for farming.
5 generations later, they're still here, and conditions still lend themselves to growing quality oats. But both the oats and the farming methods have changed over the years, especially since Graham's dad started ploughing the farm in the 1940s.
In my late father's lifetime, he would have started off, when he grew up, the oats would have been cut with a binder and stooked. But after the stooks dried, they were stacked into a big stack, and then later on, often during the winter, the mill would come in and do the milling. And then they started bringing harvesters in, which were often pulled by a tractor. And that was probably just after the Second World War, and the grain was bagged, so everything was handled in bags. And then just when I was young, in the early 60s, they started doing oats in bulk, and that was a huge step forward.
There is very few changes. It used to be all cut with a binder and stooked and through thrashing mills. Well, we've moved on.
These days, a paddock can be ploughed in just half a day, and it's not only the machinery that's improved. Thanks to selective breeding, top, tall, heavy oats are a thing of the past. Each year, over 1,500 breeding lines are planted, with a number of different outcomes in mind. There was a breeding program in New Zealand in the late 70s and 80s, through to just before the Fleming's closure, and there were a couple of successful varieties come out of that program. When Harraways became the sole oat processor in New Zealand, discussions were had about the lack of an oat breeding program in the country.
Well, I think the oat industry group that we created between us and the growers, between Harraways and the growers, has been a real platform on which to build relationships.
So we thought that it was important to start the program, and naively we thought we were about to bring some varieties in from overseas that instantly give us a 10% lift. Well, we found that they weren't at all able to do that, and the existing varieties we had were still pretty good. But if we don't do anything, we weren't going to get anywhere. So this program's been going for at least 10 years, possibly longer, and we've had one variety come out of it that's been quite successful, and it's looking like the material now that's going into the program is so much better. In fact, one of our variety is even looking quite good over in Scotland. So there's possibilities that this oat breeding program will be able to even export some of its varieties to help sustain a better royalty income stream to support it.
Hopefully in the next sort of 10 years or 20 years we'll actually see some decent new varieties come out and see some results from it.
But we're very grateful for Adrian Russell from plant research at Christchurch. He's been key to the whole success of the program.
It's all about a nice strong oat that it produces well. And looking for the best growth regulator regime that assists with that.
Farmers like plump oats that are easy to harvest using their very efficient modern machinery. It replaces the combination of horsepower, manual labour and steam engines of early generations. Today, purpose-built modern machinery that harvests and threshes the oats in the paddock before trucking them to the granary for storage. Another machine bales the straw, destined for use as winter feed. The seed trials use smaller machinery, reminiscent of earlier days. But before they're selected for these trial plots, the plants have to show signs of the characteristics Harraways and the farmers want, which means checking thousands of plants selected from different parents planted in short, easily identified rows.
Those test plots they're trying out growth regulators to keep the crop in check. It's quite challenging growing autumn sown oats because they've got a long period of growing and they can grow too tall. So that's the purpose of those trials, was to try and work out a method to keep that growth in check. And the other part, of course, is plant breeding. So you've got to try and work all the factors together. It's not just one factor, it's working them all in tandem.
The farmers need similar characteristics when it comes to harvest, so the oat's ripeness dictates the time of harvest.
Well, the oat crop goes golden, but then the next stage is it starts to go a whitish colour, and you know then that it's getting nearer to harvest.
It's a pleasure to look at, see the golden fields. You couldn't get a nicer view.
Before it's stored, the grain is dried below 14% moisture, then screened to remove any extra material and smaller oats.
Well, we harvest them and, if necessary, dry them, but often they are dry enough, and then they go over a screen to tidy up the rubbish and go into storage. So we deliver oats to Harraways 12 months of the year, so there's an overlap. So some of the oats that have been delivered after this harvest will be from the previous harvest, but that overlaps there just to make sure there's a secure supply of oats for the industry.
It's tremendous satisfaction when you see all those silos full to the hilt.
It is rewarding, very much so. It's good to know you've grown a good crop and you've done the best with what you've had. I mean, everyone likes that too. I mean, everyone likes knowing they've done well.
And we can produce healthy foods in here in New Zealand. We're clean and green, and that's the object. We may not be the cheapest, but we may have some quality advantages.
That quality begins with the land itself and a soil structure benefiting from years spent in pasture.
So we'll have our ground in cereals for anywhere between 4 and 5 years, then back into pasture for something between 5 to 10 years. And when they go back, they're very clover dominant pastures, which are extremely good at finishing lambs. So we try to work the two systems of cereal growing and sheep farming together to work for each other.
It's a long-term approach, typical of many family-run Southland farms like the Gardines.
So you know that you've got more of a connection with the land, and you definitely know that everyone's in it together.
Harraways is a family operation and in for the long run. They have a similar outlook.
We're committed to growing to Harraways, and so in our wider family, a lot of them are involved in growing for Harraways, and we've had a really good relationship working with them.
They are in for the long run. They've been there for 150 years, and we'd like to see that continue because we've been probably farming here for sort of over 100 years in the family, and we'd like to see, you know, the relationships. There's a close relation with the family and businesses, and things just keep happening year after year.
You get great pleasure out of growing good crops, producing good food, and hoping, well, not hoping, we know that Harraways are producing the end product going out to the public, and that's what it's all about at the end of the day, isn't it?
We have a good relationship with them. They're quick on their feet in adapting to changes with different seasons. They've been committed to supporting the oat breeding program, and I think that's very important for the future of the industry.
And it's given us encouragement and given us faith to work with the company.
And the fact that they're a family company decisions get made here in Otago, so that's good.
The fact that it is New Zealand grown, New Zealand produced, there is very much a following.
I mean, the whole supply chain is critical, and so we have a good relationship with our farmers who are the source of our grain. So it's important to make sure that we meet their needs as well as them meeting our needs. From a production perspective, we've got the ability to grow to whatever level we need to in terms of supplying that market, whether it's local or export. And obviously at retail, in the last 17 years we've gone from a 16% market share to nearly 40% market share.